What's poppin', players? In the culture of hip hop, it's always been a saying. Rappers want to be ball players and ball players want to be rappers. I'm Gold Ray. This part 2 of the Ballin' MCs. Let's get to it. Now, I'm be tired of all the hearing all the Scottie Pippen slander as far as what he was and what he wasn't. What I know was he was the first, I guess, stretch 3. They used to lock everybody down except the center and still get at least 20 points a game. Only other player other than Jordan that has 6 rings. So it wasn't until Scottie Pippen got the heart of a champion is when the Bulls took off and never looked back. Nelly. Next up on the list of the Ballin' MCs, Scottie Pippen, Nelly, heart of a champion. Next up on the list, Teresa Weatherspoon. And when she used to look at you and slap the floor, like, who's bad? The baddest. I ain't gonna say it. Trina. Next up on the list of the Ballin' MCs, Teresa Weatherspoon, Trina, the baddest, B. Next up on the list, Derrick Rose, the youngest NBA MVP in history. He was a superstar at an early age. Lupe Fiasco. Next up on the list of the Ballin' MCs, Derrick Rose, Lupe Fiasco, superstar. Next up on the list, Action Jackson, Mark Jackson. And being a point guard, you got to make sure that all the other players are getting their touches back in the day, or guys will get mad. So you had to treat everybody right. Chubb Rock. Next up on the list of the Ballin' MCs, Mark Jackson, Chubb Rock, treat them right. Next up on the list, Monster Mash, Jamal Mashburn. If you had the gardening, I'm sure, so help me God, went through your mind. Fonte of Lil Brother. And if y'all ain't hip to Lil Brother or Fonte separately, go do your Googles. Next up on the list, Jamal, Monster Mash, Mashburn, Fonte, so help me God. Next up on the list, Moses Malone. When he got to Philadelphia, he was the missing piece they needed to make some movement, or should we say the next movement to the championship. Black Thought from the Roots. Yes, Black Thought is part of a group, but he's the mouthpiece of the group. So next up on the list of the Ballin' MCs, Moses Malone, Black Thought, the next movement, Philadelphia. Next up on the list, BD, Baron Davis. He was before or ahead of his time, should I say. But he always seemed like he keep the city on his back as he rapped the game. Next up on the list of the Ballin' MCs, Baron Davis, the game, the city. Next up on the list, Dirk Nowitzki. He was a smooth operator, Paul Wall. Next up on the list of the Ballin' MCs, Dirk Nowitzki, Paul Wall, smooth operator. Texas legends. Next up on the list, Jason Kidd. Now, Jason Kidd was known to get you a triple-double, and when he did, he would go into beast mode. And his handles were ludicrous. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Jason Kidd, ludicrous, beast mode. Next up on the list, the Chief, Robert Parrish. With three championships, nobody beats the Biz Markie. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Robert Parrish, Biz Markie, nobody beats the Biz. Next up on the list, Sam I Am or the 2-point geezer, Sam Cassell. And y'all youngsters don't know nothing about what they would call 2 points. I'm sorry, my mind, I'm a little. But inside the 3-point line, give it to Sam, he was scoring the ball. It only takes 2 to score. Rod Bass. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Sam Cassell, Rod Bass, it takes 2. Next up on the list, Marshawn Lynch. And every time he got the ball, he ran aggressive. Gucci, which both of them, they do things on their own term. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Marshawn Lynch, Gucci, aggressive. Next up on the list, Charles Oakley, one of the enforcers of the game. When you played him, you didn't want no drama. Fat Joe. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Charles Oakley, Fat Joe, no drama. Next up on the list, Alonzo Mourning. From Georgetown to the league and now to the office, every day I'm hustling. Rick Ross, 2 of Miami's greats. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Alonzo Mourning, Rick Ross, hustling. Next up on the list, Latrell Sprewell. His game was hard. Super Thug, Nori. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Spree, Latrell Sprewell, Nori, Super Thug. If you know, you know. Next up on the list, the Rain Man, Shawn Kemp. And when he was catching those passes or those oops from Gary Payton, it was the most beautifulest thing in the world. Keith Murray. And when Keith Murray get the raining them alphabets down on you, hard to deal with him. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, the Rain Man, Shawn Kemp, Keith Murray, the most beautifulest thing in the world. Next up on the list, Daryl Dawkins. With many nicknames, he was known for shattering the backboards. And when he did, he would turn out the lights. Or should we say, turn the lights out. Freeway. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Daryl Dawkins, Freeway, turn the lights out. Next up on the list, T.O., Terrell Owens. All he played was for the standing ovation, Jeezy. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Terrell Owens, Jeezy, standing ovation. Next up on the list, Mike Vick. Mike Vick been a big deal since high school. Or should we say, kinda like a big deal. Pusha T, which was part of, we know. But he got his own solo project, so. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Michael Vick, Pusha T, kinda like a big deal. Next up on the list, Kawhi Leonard. And when he went to Toronto and got that second championship, he was too legit. Freddie Gibbs. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Kawhi Leonard, Freddie Gibbs, too legit. Next up on the list, Emmitt Smith. Every year he was coming up and coming up and coming up on that all-time record. Pimp C. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Emmitt Smith, Pimp C, coming up. Two Texas legends. Next up on the list, Rod Strickland. Had some of the coldest handles back in the day, if not to this day. How did you lose them? This game was smooth just like the song Hip Hop. Mos Def. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Rod Strickland, Mos Def, Hip Hop. Next up on the list, Tina Charles. The Players Change, Sugar T. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Tina Charles, Sugar T, The Players Change. Next up on the list, Monty Ellis, or Monte Ellis. When he's up in Golden State, he was a street superstar. Razzcast. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Monte Ellis, Razzcast, street superstar. Next up on the list, Jalen Rose. And being the point guard of the Fab Five, he always had to bring the pain. There was always a MATHOD to his madness. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Jalen Rose, Method Man, Bring the Pain. Then next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Chris Webber, Raekwon the Chef, Incarcerated Scarfaces. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Juwan Howard, Ghostface, the Iron Man. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Ray Jackson, Old Dirty Bastard, the Hipper to the Hopper. And next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Jimmy King, Jizza, I Got Your Back. If you didn't know, that was the Fab Five and 5 members of Wu-Tang. Couldn't get all 9 of y'all in there. I apologize. But next up on the list, the original Killer crossover, Tim Hardaway. And he would hit you with that killer cam. Cameron. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Tim Hardaway, Cameron, Killer Cam. Next up on the list, Karl Malone. And when he was coming through the lane, beware, Big Pun. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Karl Malone, Big Pun, beware. Next up on the list, Steve, the franchise, Francis. And when he was down in Houston, he was like a Don, or should we say, Mo City Don. Zero. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Steve Francis, Zero, Mo City Don. Next up on the list, J.R. Ryder. He left us with an infamous dunk, the East Bay Funk, that still kids copy to this day. The Green-Eyed Bandit, Eric Sermon, gave us that East Coast funk. So next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, J.R. Ryder, Eric Sermon, music. The J.R. Ryder's game was smooth like the game music. Excuse me. Next up on the list, Mitch Richmond. Always kept it to the G code. Spice One. Both their games was deadly. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Mitch Richmond, Spice One, sticking to the G code. Next up on the list, 2-point guards, Big Shot, Chauncey Billups. He was the General Patton, Big Boy. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Chauncey Billups, Big Boy, General Patton. Next up on the list, Antoine Walker. In Boston, they was known as Cybertwan. Soldier Boy, known for being the first hip-hop artist on YouTube. Crank That, the Superman. Next up on the list of the Ballin MCs, Antoine Walker, Soldier Boy, Crank That. Next up on the list, James Harden. In Houston, gave him the ball, and he will hustle and motivate. Fear the Beards, Nipsey Hussle. Last but not least for part 2 of the Ballin MCs, James Harden, Nipsey Hussle, hustle and motivate. That concludes part 2 of the Ballin MCs. Come right back with part 3. Peace.